The aqueous threat. The vast expanse of space had never seemed so oppressive. Admiral Lyra Chen stood at the helm of the UES Defiant, her eyes fixed on the holographic display before her. The image showed a swirling mass of blue and green, beautiful in its ethereal glow, terrifying in its implications. "Status report," she barked, her voice steady despite the tension that gripped her chest. Commander Rajpatal stepped forward, his dark eyes grave. "The Zarkonian fleet has breached the Orion defense line. Admiral, they've deployed their hydro weapons on 3 more colony worlds." A collective shudder ran through the bridge crew. The hydro weapons were the stuff of nightmares, a liquid death that consumed everything in its path, turning organic matter into more of itself. Whole planets had fallen, their ecosystems transformed into alien landscapes that pulsed with an eerie, aqueous life. Lyra's jaw clenched. Humanity had faced threats before: wars, plagues, environmental disasters. But nothing like this. The Zarkonians, an advanced aquatic species from the depths of the Andromeda galaxy, had arrived in the Milky Way a year ago. At first, they had seemed peaceful, eager to trade and share knowledge. But it had all been a ruse. Their true intention was conquest, and their weapon of choice was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "What's the status of Project Watershed?" Lyra asked, turning to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the ship's chief scientist. Elena's hologram flickered to life, her expression a mix of excitement and trepidation. "We've made a breakthrough, Admiral. We've isolated the base compound of the hydro weapons. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. It's not just a weapon, it's alive." Lyra leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Alive? Explain." "The liquid isn't just a carrier for nanobots or a complex chemical agent," Elena continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It's a new form of matter altogether. It has a rudimentary intelligence, the ability to learn and adapt. That's why it's been so effective against our defenses. It evolves to overcome whatever we throw at it." Commander Patil interjected, his voice laced with frustration. "So you're saying it's unbeatable? That we should just roll over and let the Zarkonians take our worlds?" Elena shook her head vehemently. "No, that's not what I'm saying at all. In fact, this discovery might be our salvation. You see, the hydro weapon's adaptability, it works both ways." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Both ways? What are you getting at, Doctor?" Elena took a deep breath, her hologram flickering slightly as she gathered her thoughts. "The hydro weapon adapts to overcome resistance, yes, but in doing so, it also takes on characteristics of whatever it's trying to conquer. In essence, it becomes a hybrid of itself and its target." A heavy silence fell over the bridge as the implications of Elena's words sank in. It was Lyra who finally broke it, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Doctor?" Elena nodded, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and determination. "Yes, Admiral. I believe that if we can find a way to interface with the hydro weapon, to let it adapt to us on our terms, we might be able to control it, to use it against the Zarkonians." Commander Patil exploded, his face contorted with shock. "That's insane. You're talking about deliberately exposing our people to this thing. It's suicide." But Lyra was already considering the possibilities, her tactical mind racing. "How sure are you about this, Doctor? What kind of time frame are we looking at?" Elena's hologram straightened, her voice taking on a more formal tone. "With the resources at our disposal, I believe we could have a prototype ready for testing within a week. But Admiral, I must stress the risks. We have no idea what the effects might be on a human subject. The physical and psychological changes could be extreme." Lyra nodded gravely. "Understood. But given the alternative, I don't see that we have much choice. The Zarkonians are advancing on all fronts. If we don't find a way to turn this around soon, there won't be any humans left to save." She turned to Commander Patil, her expression resolute. "Raj, I want you to put together a team of volunteers, the best and brightest we have. Make sure they understand the risks and the stakes." Patel saluted, his earlier outburst forgotten in the face of a direct order. "Yes, Admiral. I'll get on it right away." As the bridge erupted into a flurry of activity, Lyra turned back to the holographic display. The swirling mass of the hydro weapon seemed to pulse, almost as if it were alive and aware of the plans being made. For a moment, Lyra allowed herself to feel the full weight of the decision she had just made. She was potentially condemning volunteers to a fate worse than death. But if it worked, it could save not just humanity, but all the species threatened by the Zarkonian onslaught. She squared her shoulders, pushing aside her doubts. There would be time for recrimination later, if they survived. For now, they had a war to win and a desperate gamble to prepare for. As she began issuing orders, coordinating with other fleet commanders and Earth's Central Command, a small part of Lyra's mind wandered to the volunteers who would soon be called upon, who would step forward, who would be willing to risk everything, to potentially sacrifice their very humanity for a chance at victory. She didn't envy them their choice, but she knew, with a certainty that came from years of command, that they would come. Humanity had always produced heroes when they were needed most. Now, facing the greatest threat in their history, Lyra had no doubt they would rise to the challenge once again. As the Defiant sped towards Earth, carrying its cargo of hope and terror, Lyra allowed herself a grim smile. The Zarkonians thought they had created the perfect weapon. They were about to learn that humanity was not so easily conquered. The hydro weapons had changed the rules of warfare. Now, humanity was about to change them again. The volunteer program. The announcement came without warning, broadcast simultaneously across every channel, every neural link, every communication device in human-controlled space. Admiral Lyra Chen's face, grim and determined, filled screens large and small. "Citizens of Earth and her colonies," she began, her voice steady and unwavering. "For the past year, we have fought a desperate battle against the Zarkonian invaders and their hydro weapons. Today, I come to you not with news of defeat, but with a call to action." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Our scientists have made a breakthrough. We believe we have found a way to turn the Zarkonians' greatest weapon against them. But to do so, we need volunteers. Brave men and women willing to risk everything for the sake of humanity's survival." As Lyra explained the basics of the plan, deliberately interfacing with the hydro weapons to gain control over them, reactions across human space ranged from shock to disbelief to grim determination. In a small apartment in New Beijing, Lai Wei, a former Marine-turned-teacher, felt a familiar fire ignite in his chest. He looked at the picture of his late wife and young daughter, killed in the Zarkonian attack on Mars Colony. Without a word, he stood and headed for the nearest recruitment center. Halfway across the globe, in the underwater city of Atlantis Nova, Dr. Amara Okoro watched the broadcast with growing excitement. As one of the leading xenobiologists in human space, she had been studying the hydro weapons since their first appearance. The chance to interface with them directly, to potentially control them, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. She immediately began composing her application. On the lunar base Armstrong, veteran pilot Zara Rodriguez felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. She had seen firsthand the devastation wrought by the hydro weapons, had lost friends and comrades to their insidious touch. The thought of voluntarily exposing herself to them was terrifying. But if it meant a chance to end this war, to save what was left of humanity, she made her decision before the broadcast had even ended. Within hours, recruitment centers across Earth and the colonies were overwhelmed. Despite the risks, or perhaps because of them, volunteers came forward in droves. They were soldiers and scientists, teachers and engineers, the young and the old. Each had their own reasons, their own stories, but they were united in their determination to fight back against the Zarkonian threat. At the secret facility deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, where Project Waters was headquartered, Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the first group of volunteers arrive with a mix of hope and trepidation. She had spent every waking moment since her breakthrough refining the process, running simulations, trying to predict what might happen when human biology interfaced with the alien hydroweapons. But for all her preparations, she knew they were stepping into uncharted territory. The hydroweapons were as much a mystery as they were a threat. How would they react to deliberate, controlled exposure? What changes would they wreak on the human body and mind? As the volunteers were processed, grieved, and prepared for the first trials, Elena couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at their courage. They knew the risks, knew that they might not survive the process, or worse, might survive but be changed beyond recognition. Yet here they were, ready to sacrifice everything for a chance to turn the tide of the war. The first volunteer to undergo the procedure was Captain Marcus Chen, no relation to Admiral Lyra. A decorated Special Forces operative, Marcus had fought the Zarkonians on a dozen worlds. He had seen friends liquefied by the hydroweapons, had watched helplessly as entire ecosystems were transformed into alien seascapes pulsing with malevolent life. As he was strapped into the containment chamber, electrodes attached to his head and chest to monitor his vital signs, Marcus met Elena's eyes through the thick glass. "Whatever happens, Doc," he said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "Make sure it counts." Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She turned to the control panel, her fingers hovering over the activation sequence. With a deep breath, she initiated the process. A thin stream of bluish liquid, a carefully distilled and modified version of the hydroweapon, began to flow into the chamber. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Marcus's body went rigid, his back arching as the liquid made contact with his skin. Alarms blared as his vital signs spiked. On the monitors, Elena watched in fascination and horror as Marcus's cellular structure began to change, his very DNA rewriting itself as the hydroweapon interfaced with his biology. For 3 agonizing minutes, Marcus's body convulsed, shifting between solid and liquid states as the transformation took hold. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The alarms fell silent. Marcus lay still, his body glistening with a faint blue sheen. "Captain Chen," Elena called out, her voice shaking. "Marcus, can you hear me?" Slowly, Marcus's eyes opened. They were the same brown they had always been, but now they seemed to shimmer, as if filled with tiny currents. He sat up, looking at his hands in wonder. I can feel it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "The hydroweapon. It's a part of me now. But I'm still me. I'm still in control." Elena's heart soared. It had worked. Against all odds, it had worked. But even as she celebrated this first success, she knew they had a long way to go. Marcus was just the first. They needed more volunteers, needed to refine the process, needed to understand the full extent of the changes and how to utilize them against the Zarkonians. As news of the first successful transformation spread, more volunteers came forward. Each integration was unique, the hydroweapons adapting differently to each individual. Some gained the ability to manipulate water with their minds. Others found they could transform their bodies into liquid at will, flowing through the smallest cracks and reforming on the other side. But there were failures too. Volunteers whose bodies rejected the integration, who dissolved into puddles of inert liquid. Others who lost their minds to the alien influence, becoming feral creatures that had to be contained and studied in the hope of reversing their condition. Through it all, Elena and her team worked tirelessly, refining the process, pushing the boundaries of science and human endurance. They were in a race against time, knowing that every day they spent in development was another day the Zarkonians advanced, another human world lost to the hydroweapons. 2 weeks after the first successful integration, Admiral Lyra Chen visited the facility. She stood before the assembled volunteers, her eyes taking in their changed appearances, the shimmer of their skin, the fluid grace of their movements. "You have all made an incredible sacrifice," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You have taken into yourselves the very thing we have been fighting against, and in doing so, you have given us hope. Now we must take the fight back to the Zarkonians. Are you ready?" The response was immediate and unanimous. A resounding yes that seemed to ripple through the air like a wave. Lyra nodded, a fierce smile on her face. "Then let's show these aquatic bastards what happens when they mess with humanity. It's time to take back our galaxy." As the newly transformed volunteers prepared for their first mission, there was a palpable sense of excitement and determination in the air. They had done the impossible. They had not just survived the hydro weapons, but had made them their own. The Zarkonians thought they had created the perfect weapon. They were about to learn that in the hands of humanity, even the deadliest threat could become the key to salvation. The tide of war was about to turn, and the galaxy would never be the same. Unexpected evolution. The first deployment of the hydro-integrated humans, dubbed aquamarines by some wag in the press corps, was supposed to be a small-scale operation. A surgical strike against a Zarkonian outpost on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. It was meant to test their capabilities, to see how they fared in actual combat conditions. No one, least of all the aquamarines themselves, was prepared for what actually happened. The UES Poseidon, a stealth corvette specially modified to accommodate the unique needs of its transformed crew, slipped into Europa's orbit under the cover of a magnetic storm. As they prepared to launch, Captain Marcus Chen, the first successful aquamarine, addressed his team. "Remember your training," he said, his voice carrying an odd liquid resonance. "We hit hard, we hit fast, and we show these fish-faced bastards that they're not the only ones who can play with water." The team nodded, their eyes glimmering with anticipation. Then, without need for drop pods or shuttles, they simply stepped out of the airlock and into the void of space. In an instant, their bodies transformed, becoming streamlined torpedoes of living water that cut through the vacuum with impossible speed. They streaked towards Europa's icy surface, their liquid forms easily penetrating the thick shell to enter the subsurface ocean, where the Zarkonian base was hidden. The plan was to infiltrate the base, gather intelligence, and, if possible, sabotage their hydro-weapon production facilities. But plans, as they say, rarely survive first contact with the enemy. As soon as the aquamarines entered Europa's alien sea, they felt it. A call, a pull, and as soon as the aquamarines entered Europa's alien sea, they felt it. A call, a pull, an awakening of something deep within their transformed bodies. The hydro weapons that had become part of them resonated with the vast ocean around them. And suddenly, they understood. Marcus was the first to verbalize it, his thoughts rippling through the water to reach his team. "It's alive," he said, awe and shock mingling in his mental voice. "The whole ocean. It's one giant organism." Dr. Amara Okoro, who had insisted on joining this first mission, felt her scientific mind reeling with the implications. The Zarkonians, she realized. They're not using the ocean. They're communicating with it. The hydro weapons, they're not weapons at all. They're a language. This revelation changed everything. As the team pushed deeper into the alien sea, they found themselves not just swimming, but communicating. The ocean responded to their presence, currents shifting to guide them, bioluminescent creatures lighting their way. They arrived at the Zarkonian base to find it was nothing like they had expected. There were no fortifications, no weapons arrays. Instead, they found a sprawling organic structure that pulsed with life, indistinguishable from the ocean around it. And the Zarkonians themselves. The aquamarines watched in fascination as the alien beings flowed through their living city, their bodies shifting and changing much like the humans now could. But there was a key difference, where the aquamarines still maintained a distinction between their human selves and their liquid forms. The Zarkonians seemed to exist in a constant state of flux, never fully solid, never fully liquid. It was Zora Rodriguez, the former pilot, who made the next crucial discovery. As a curious Zarkonian approached their group, Zara instinctively reached out with her mind, trying to communicate as they had with the ocean. The contact was immediate and overwhelming. Images, emotions, and concepts flooded her mind, too fast and alien to fully comprehend. But one thing came through clearly. The Zarkonians were just as surprised by the humans' presence as the humans were by what they had found. They didn't know. Zora gasped, reeling from the mental contact. They had no idea their weapons would integrate with us like this. They thought they were helping us evolve. The revelation stunned the team. All this time, the war that had cost so many lives, transformed whole worlds, it had all been a terrible misunderstanding. As the aquamarines struggled to process this information, something else began to happen. The hydro-integrated parts of their bodies, which had already evolved beyond the original weapons, started to change again. It was as if the contact with the living ocean of Europa, the mental touch of the Zarkonians, had awakened new potentials. Marcus watched in amazement as his arm transformed, not into the familiar liquid state, but into a complex, fractal structure that seemed to exist somewhere between solid and liquid. He could feel new senses awakening, could perceive the flow of energy and information through the ocean around him. Similar changes were happening to all of them. Amara found she could suddenly understand the complex chemical language of the ocean, reading its moods and currents like a book. Lai Wei discovered he could extend his consciousness into the water around him, sensing everything within a vast radius. The Zarkonians, watching this transformation, were broadcasting a mixture of excitement and trepidation. They had hoped to guide humanity's evolution, to help them transcend their limited, terrestrial forms. But this was beyond anything they had imagined. As the changes stabilized, Marcus made a decision. This was too big, too important to handle on their own. They needed to contact the fleet, to let them know what they had discovered. But more than that, they needed to open a dialogue with the Zarkonians, to end this war before it destroyed both their species. Using their newfound abilities, the Aquamarines established a three-way communication link between themselves, the Zarkonians, and the UES Poseidon in orbit. As explanations and apologies flowed back and forth, as the terrible misunderstanding that had led to so much destruction was finally cleared up, Marcus felt a profound sense of hope. They had come to Europa expecting to fight a battle. Instead, they had stumbled upon the key to peace and perhaps to humanity's next great leap forward. But even as the first tentative steps towards reconciliation were being taken, a new concern arose. The changes they had undergone were profound and ongoing. The line between human and something else was blurring. As Marcus looked at his team, at the Zarkonians, at the living ocean around them, he wondered, in averting one war, had they set the stage for another? How would the rest of humanity react to what they had become? As the Poseidon prepared to transmit their report back to Earth, Marcus knew that the real challenges were only just beginning. The war with the Zarkonians might be over, but the battle for humanity's future was about to begin. And this time, the enemy wasn't an alien race or a deadly weapon. It was fear. Fear of change. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what humanity might become in this new, fluid universe they had discovered. As he prepared to face this new challenge, Marcus couldn't help but smile. After all, if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was adapting to the impossible. The Hydra weapons had changed them. True. But in the end, it was still humanity's indomitable spirit that would shape their destiny. Counterattack. The news of the Aquamarine's discovery on Europa spread through the human fleet like wildfire. Initial reactions ranged from disbelief to outrage to cautious hope. Admiral Lyra Chen, ever the pragmatist, saw the potential immediately. "We've been fighting the wrong war," she announced to her assembled commanders. "But that ends now. We have an opportunity not just to end this conflict, but to leap forward as a species. We're going to take it." Not everyone agreed. There were those who viewed the transformed Aquamarines with suspicion and fear, who argued that they were no longer human and couldn't be trusted. Others saw the Zarkonians' actions as an invasion of a different sort, a forced evolution that humanity should reject. But as reports came in from other fronts, the decision was made for them. The hydro weapons, responsive to the changes in the aquamarines and the shift in the Zarkonians' intentions, were changing. On worlds where they had run rampant, destroying all in their path, they were now forming complex, living ecosystems. Hostile, yes, to unprotected humans, but no longer actively aggressive. More importantly, the aquamarines found they could communicate with these transformed environments, could shape and direct them to a degree. It wasn't control, not exactly, but it was a form of cooperation that opened up incredible possibilities. Lyra saw the opportunity and seized it. She put out a call for volunteers, not just for military personnel, but for scientists, engineers, artists, anyone willing to undergo the transformation and help bridge the gap between humanity's past and its fluid future. The response was overwhelming. For every person who recoiled from the idea, there were two more who stepped forward, eager to be part of this new frontier. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, monitoring the transformations, made another breakthrough. "We can control the degree of integration," she reported excitedly. "It doesn't have to be all or nothing. We can give people the ability to interact with the hydro environments without completely changing their biology." This news helped sway many of the holdouts. Humanity could adapt, could gain these new abilities, without losing what made them human. As the ranks of the transformed swelled, Lyra put her plan into action. It wasn't a counterattack in the traditional sense. There was no enemy to fight, not anymore. Instead, it was a campaign of reclamation and transformation. Fleets of ships carrying both fully transformed aquamarines and partially integrated support teams spread out across human space. Their mission: to reclaim the worlds lost to the hydro weapons, to reshape them into places where both traditional and transformed humans could live. On Mars, the first world to fall to the Zarkonian attack, the scene was breathtaking. Where once there had been barren red deserts, now there were vast, shimmering oceans of blue-green liquid. But these weren't water, not exactly. They were a new form of matter, a liquid alive with possibility. Lai Wei, standing on the shore of one such ocean, felt a lump in his throat as he remembered his family, lost in the initial attack. With a thought, he extended his consciousness into the liquid landscape. He couldn't bring back the dead, but perhaps. Before his eyes, the liquid began to shift and flow. Structures rose from the depths, not buildings in the traditional sense, but organic forms that pulsed with life and purpose. He could feel the echoes of human thought, of human creativity in their shapes. The hydro weapons, once instruments of destruction, were now tools of creation. Similar scenes were playing out across human space. On Europa, Zara Rodriguez was leading a team to establish the first joint human Zarkonian colony. The icy moon, once a battlefield, was becoming a symbol of cooperation and shared evolution. In the rings of Saturn, Amara Okoro was overseeing the birth of something entirely new, a diffuse, spacefaring civilization of transformed humans who flowed through the icy particles of the rings as easily as they once had walked on solid ground. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. On Earth and other core worlds, there was resistance. Some saw the transformation as a threat to human identity, a danger to be contained or even eradicated. Tensions rose, and there were isolated incidents of violence against the transformed. Marcus Chen, now serving as a liaison between the transformed and traditional humans, found himself walking a delicate line. "We're still human," he insisted in countless interviews and public appearances. "We've changed, yes, but change has always been part of the human story. We're not replacing humanity, we're expanding what humanity can be." Slowly, gradually, his words began to take hold. As more people underwent partial integration, as the benefits of the new technology became clear, acceptance grew. The hydro worlds, once seen as lost, became new frontiers ripe for exploration and settlement. 5 years after the first aquamarines had plunged into Europa's alien sea, humanity stood on the brink of a new era. They had faced annihilation and emerged not just victorious, but transformed. The galaxy, once a place of terror and conflict, now beckoned with infinite possibilities. As Admiral Lyra Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching a newsfeed from a dozen transformed worlds, she allowed herself a small smile. They had done it. Against all odds, humanity had not just survived, but thrived. The counterattack was complete, but the adventure was just beginning. A new era, 20 years after the event that would come to be known as the Hydro Integration, humanity barely resembled its former self. The solar system, once a collection of disparate planets and moons, had become a vast, interconnected network of hydro-enhanced worlds and habitats. Earth, the cradle of humanity, had undergone perhaps the most striking transformation. The rising seas, once a looming threat, had been embraced and reshaped. Coastal cities didn't fight against the water. They merged with it. Buildings flowed seamlessly from land to sea, their structures adapting in real time to the needs of their inhabitants. In the deeper oceans, vast, glowing metropolises pulsed with life, home to both fully aquatic humans and a growing population of Zarkonian immigrants. The moon, its regolith infused with hydromatter, had sprouted a sprawling network of underground lakes and rivers. Lunar colonists glided through these liquid tunnels, their bodies adapting effortlessly between surface locomotion and aquatic navigation. Mars, once the red planet, now shimmered with blues and greens. Its new oceans teemed with Earth-originated life, genetically modified to thrive in the hydro-enhanced environment. Terraforming, once the work of centuries, had been accomplished in decades. But perhaps the most profound changes were those that had occurred within humanity itself. The division between traditional and transformed humans had blurred almost to the point of meaninglessness. Most people now existed on a spectrum, able to shift their biology to suit their environment or task at hand. This new fluidity extended beyond the physical. The hydro-integration had opened up new forms of communication and consciousness. Humans could now share thoughts and experiences directly, forming vast networks of shared cognition. The internet of old seemed quaint in comparison to the living, thinking devasphere that now enveloped the solar system. At the heart of this transformed society stood the Fluidity Council, a governing body comprised of humans, Zarkonians, and even representatives of the semi-sentient hydro-environments themselves. Admiral Lyra Chen, now well into her 80s but kept vital by hydro treatments, served as humanity's chief representative. "We stand at a crossroads," Lyra announced in a system-wide address, her words carried not just by traditional broadcasts, but by ripples through the hydro network that connected all transformed life. The solar system is no longer our limit. The galaxy beckons. The decision to expand beyond Sol had not been made lightly. There were concerns about encountering other civilizations, about the ethics of transforming new worlds. But the pull of exploration, that age-old human drive, proved irresistible. The first extrasolar expedition was led by a familiar face, Captain Marcus Chen, his body now a shimmering blend of human and hydroform, able to adapt to almost any environment. His ship, if it could be called that, was unlike anything humanity had created before. Part living organism, part machine, part crew, it was a self-contained ecosystem capable of sustaining itself indefinitely in the void between stars. As the expedition prepared to make its first faster-than-light jump, using principles derived from studying the fluid nature of space-time through a hydro-enhanced lens, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. They had faced extinction and emerged stronger. They had confronted the unknown and made it part of themselves. They had taken a weapon meant to destroy them and turned it into the key to their transcendence. But even as humanity reached for the stars, new questions arose. How far could they change before they ceased to be human? What responsibilities did they bear for the worlds they would transform? And what other wonders or dangers waited for them in the vast, unexplored reaches of the galaxy. As the ship prepared to jump, its crew linked in a network of shared consciousness, Marcus smiled. Whatever challenges awaited them, he knew one thing for certain. Humanity would face them as they always had, with courage, creativity, and an unwavering determination to adapt and survive. The Hydra weapons had reshaped humanity. But in the end, it was humanity that had reshaped the Hydra weapons, and in doing so, had reshaped their own destiny. As the ship disappeared into the fluid folds of spacetime, it carried with it the hopes and dreams of a transformed species. The era of traditional humanity had ended. The age of Homo fluidus had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.